On the day, the scene unfolded in the main hall of TechNova, our Seattle headquarters. That space, an open sea of desks and bright monitors, was the heart of the multinational that I had built with my own hands. I was in the center, talking to the legal director when she arrived. My wife Emma, 6 years younger, a force of nature in terms of charm, and I realized too late, manipulation. She radiated that cold confidence of those who believe they are above the rules. She marched through the hall, ignoring stares, and climbed onto the small stage we use for weekly performances. With her arms crossed, and a tone that cut through the hubbub of the office, she shouted for all to hear, "The company is rightfully mine, understand?" The effect was immediate and palpable. I felt the silence spread like a shockwave. Employees stopped typing. Analysts left their screens frozen. The marketing people were flabbergasted. The air was heavy with disbelief. She looked at me with calculated fury, as if I was only a temporary obstacle on her path to fortune. A CEO of a company valued at hundreds of millions was, to her, just an inconvenient husband to be discarded. "You're not going to win anything, you know." The sentence she launched, although slightly different, carried the same cold arrogance of my Block 1 script. It was direct humiliation, right there, in front of the people who depended on me and the company for a living. I was silent, but inside me something screamed, "I am the founder and CEO of TechNova." I started it all in a small apartment in Boston. Emma met me when the company was already well established, but it was still a rocket in the rise. She was charming, ambitious, and seemed to support my vision. I married the woman I thought was the ideal partner. I am the husband who built the empire. I was never her favorite. In fact, I think her favorite has always been my bank balance. She was a CEO's wife, accustomed to Manhattan luxury and first-class flights, but never interested in the actual work. It floated on the edges of my success, enjoying the fruits. I realized that I didn't have to win by shouting. Her attitudes in recent months have gone from the subtle to the flagrant. They began to hide documents, whisper behind doors. She and an accomplice, a financial advisor whom I naively hired on her recommendation, began to act as if I were not in the room. They believed I was too busy expanding the company to notice the coming scam. They spoke as if I were invisible. I clearly remember the day I returned from a business trip to Tokyo. The jet lag was brutal, but something bothered me. I later found out that Emma had tried to access the vault where we kept copies of the foundation contracts. She claimed to have lost a valuable earring, a flimsy excuse that did not stand up to my scrutiny. She and her accomplice exchanged messages about how to falsify documents. They talked about how to use the absence of a more specific asset-sharing document to claim that she was entitled to a higher percentage than the law would allow. The accomplice promised to help her forge signatures if necessary. Greed blinded them. They wanted to hurry. I had time. At that moment, I stopped being a victim. I became an observer. That's when I took the real contract out of the bag. In fact, I didn't take myself out of the bag, but my legal director, the experienced Arthur. He was standing next to me throughout Emma's show, a calm and unflappable man, the perfect contrast to her hysteria. While Emma finished her speech demanding that the team recognize the true owner, Arthur just opened the black folder. He didn't say a word. He just put on the presentation table the real document, the TechNova Foundation Agreement. The document was authenticated and archived. But there was more. There were additional clauses, shields that I had quietly inserted around the time we were about to close the Series B investment round. I had anticipated the move. Underestimating a CEO, especially one who built everything from scratch, is a fatal mistake. They had greed. I had the documents. And then came the brutal twist. Arthur took the microphone and, in his deep, calm voice, just read Clause 14B, the clause I had ordered years earlier, based on a foreboding that turned out to be prophetic. In case of attempted fraud, manipulation, or misappropriation, any spouse totally loses any right to the company. The silence in the room grew even deeper, if that was possible. Emma seemed to have been punched in the stomach. The triumphant gleam in his eyes faded. Arthur then performed the coup de grace. He displayed the documents on an improvised screen. They were not just copies. There was evidence attached. Screenshots of the messages exchanged with the accomplice, logs of unauthorized vault access attempts, security camera videos showing her trying to bribe the night guard. She believed that I had not seen the messages. I believed that I had not noticed the attempt to access my contracts. She collapsed. Her face turned pale. Her body seemed to lose all strength. The silence in the room was so deep that even the background servers seemed to have stopped working. The employees, once shocked, now looked on in disbelief and pity. Fooling a businessman is easy. It is difficult to beat an entrepreneur who wakes up. She tried to expose me publicly, but it ended up exposed. He tried to take over my company, but he ended up losing any right to what he once dreamed of owning. My revenge was not to fight. It was to let them lose alone. Sometimes the best answer is written in a notary's office. She thought she would win by shouting, but he forgot that, in the face of the truth, the contract always speaks louder. If it were you, would he have signed such a strict contract or let her speak for herself? I took a deep breath, watching Emma stagger backwards. The stage she had used for her show of arrogance was now the site of her humiliation. That silence, once shocked, has now turned into a stillness of judgment. She looked at the screen where her messages with her accomplice glowed in large, cold letters. It was the end of a dream of easy wealth and the beginning of a legal nightmare. That day I understood the true value of discretion. For years I kept my legal planning in the strictest secrecy. I never shared the details of my asset shields. It was a lesson I learned early in the business world. Never let your competitors know your next steps. Emma was not only my wife. She became a competitor, a scammer disguised as a companion. I approached her slowly, with the calm of someone who has already won. She tried to say something, but her voice failed. She looked at the staff, perhaps looking for a vestige of sympathy or support, but found only serious faces and averting eyes. The truth is that the team knew me. They knew how much I dedicated myself to the company, how fair I was. Her show was an insult to everything we built together. She tried to whisper, you can't do that. But Arthur, my legal director, was relentless. He pointed to the screen where Clause 14b was highlighted. The contract was crystal clear. Attempted fraud was not a minor offense. It was the fundamental breakdown of trust and partnership. The lesson I absorbed in law school was simple. Malicious intent changes the whole game. It was not a matter of divorce and the division of common property. It was an attempt at misappropriation, a premeditated coup to take control of a company that was the livelihood of hundreds of families. As Emma was escorted out of the room without fanfare, with only the dignity she had left in tatters, I turned to the team. The moment demanded not fury, but firmness. I didn't need to scream. Keep up the work. TechNova doesn't stop. That was the only thing I said. There were no sermons, no long explanations. They understood. The stability of the company was guaranteed. The coup had failed. I spent the next few hours in meetings, making sure the legal contingency plan was in full swing. I didn't want Emma's downfall to affect morale or operations. I didn't want her to have the satisfaction of causing collateral disaster. That day taught me that behind every great ambition can be dangerous greed. I, who've always been a man of trust, had to learn to be a man of protection. Protect my work, my team, and my legacy. And I did it quietly, with a contract. I had always been an entrepreneur who valued transparency, but marriage taught me the value of strategic opacity. Love blinded me for a while, but loyalty to my company woke me up. I realized that when dealing with great fortunes and great ambitions, naivety is a fatal flaw. I couldn't allow one person's greed to jeopardize what so many had built. What really hurt me was not the money, but the betrayal of trust. I had introduced her to my friends, to my parents, to my whole life. I had placed her in a position of power and prestige. In return, she planned to take me down. This cold revelation was more bitter than any financial loss could ever be. The days that followed were filled with bureaucracy, but with a peace of mind that I hadn't felt in months. Emma's blow had made me tense, vigilant. Now, the silence of the law did the job. The contract, which she didn't even bother to read or fully understand, was my wall. She thought my global expansion was a distraction. In fact, each new clause, each new filing, was an extra layer of protection. I was playing chess. She, ladies, the complicit financial advisor, tried to deny everything. He claimed that the messages were just hypothetical conversations. But justice has a blind eye and ears for the truth. Arthur and his team had in their hands the call logs, the logs of denied access to my computer, encrypted emails. The attempt to cover it up only made their situation worse. I remember a conversation with Arthur in my living room looking at the panoramic view of Seattle. He told me, "You did the only right thing, CEO. You didn't react to the emotion. You reacted to the law. It was the confirmation that my silence and my discretion had been my greatest weapons. Silent justice has a power that the scream will never have. Emma screamed. I acted at the registry office. The difference is the same between the noise of a storm and the silence of a cliff. One scares. The other is immovable. The trauma of that day at headquarters was not forgotten, but was transformed. The employees saw the fragility of greed and the strength of the solid foundation. They saw that leadership does not bow to blackmail. This ironically brought the team even closer together. They knew the company was solid, emotional, and financial earthquake-proof. I found myself thinking about the nature of ambition. Mine led me to build. Hers, trying to demolish. At some point, she confused access to my wealth with her possession. She thought that being a CEO's wife meant she was a co-CEO, but without the job. The contract reminded her of reality. The only name in the company's founding line was mine. I've spent most of my adult life immersed in startup and tech culture, where work ethic and innovation are sacred. Emma's attempt at a financial shortcut was an offense not only to me, but to this culture. She wanted the fruit without the seed, the harvest without the planting, and in the business world, this is seen as parasitic. American law, in cases of attempted marital fraud, tends to be harsh, and I prepared myself for this harshness. My legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that each step was unassailable. There was no room for sentimental appeals. Clause 14b was not just a clause. It was evidence of anticipation and active protection. I remember a moment, days after the incident, when I received an email from one of my oldest engineers. He simply wrote, "Thank you for protecting us." That message was worth more than any business magazine headline. She reminded me that TechNova was more than digits in a bank account. It was a community. Emma tried through her lawyers to insinuate that I was manipulating her, that Clause 14b was unfair. But the truth is that the contract had been signed by both, with legal advice at the time. She just didn't take him seriously. He thought that the signature was just a formality, a piece of paper. She forgot that in the United States, a contract is the law. The turnaround was complete. She, who longed to be recognized as the owner of TechNova, was now just a name in a divorce process. Without the right to the main slice of the pie she tried to steal. I moved on. Work was my cure. Expansion projects, new product launches, the routine of a CEO. There was no room for the melodrama that Emma tried to create. I had a company to run and a legacy to protect. The only way to show that it didn't affect me was to keep winning. And I won. Silently. I watched her leave, escorted not by security guards but out of sheer shame. Her humiliation was not something I planned to enjoy, but it was the inevitable consequence of her own choice. She tried to leave with her head held high, but the steady gait of minutes ago had turned into a stumbling block. The high heels she wore to look superior now felt like a weight on her feet. As she passed me, her eyes met mine. There was no hatred, no fury left, just a cold, paralyzing understanding. At that moment, she stopped being a victim. I became an observer. She finally understood the depth of my preparation, the extent of my strategic silence. The door to the main hall closed behind her, and the office routine didn't return to normal immediately. There was a low murmur of conversation. I knew I needed to restore order, not with a lecture, but with an act of leadership. I asked Arthur to do something that would seal the lesson, something that would ensure that the story wouldn't be told halfway. He returned to the big screen where the screenshots of the fraud messages were still visible. With one click, it displayed something new. A simple table. The title of the table was Comparative Time and Value. Time spent by me, 12 years of continuous work, 80 hours per week. Time spent by Emma, 6 months of fraud planning, 0 hours of work in the company. My investment, initial capital debts and mortgage of the parents' house. Her investment, none. Amount claimed by her in the scam attempt, 50% of TechNova, approximately $150 million. Amount granted to it by Clause 14b, 0. The simplicity of the table was brutal. She put her greed in undeniable numbers. She wanted 50% of my 12-year effort for 6 months of betrayal. The team looked at the screen. It was the final proof that it was not a marital dispute, but a poorly planned corporate robbery. They spoke as if I were invisible. That was my final response to the show she had put together. I didn't have to say a word. The numbers spoke louder than any scream from her. The story did not end at the salon. In court, the humiliation continued. She hoped that the Seattle courthouse would be a stage for her, so that she could cry and convince the judge that she was a victim of her ex-husband's capitalist cruelty. She tried to blame the consultant, claiming that he had manipulated her. But the justice had the transcript of a call that she tried to deny. In the call, she told her accomplice, "Don't worry, he's blinded by overseas expansion. You won't realize it until it's too late." The judge, a pragmatic man in a gray suit, looked at her over his glasses. There was no emotion on his face, only the weight of the law. He denied all of her requests for injunctions and provisional access. The decision was quick and based exclusively on evidence of bad faith. Clause 14b has been validated. Not only did she lose the right to the company, but she also had to bear the entirety of the legal costs, which were astronomical. The only thing she took from the wedding was the clothes on her back and the lawyer's bill. She thought that the CEO wife life would shield her. She forgot that in the United States, corporate fraud is taken seriously. She left the courthouse not for her penthouse in Manhattan, but for a rented house. Her name, which she tried to elevate to the status of owner of a multinational, was now associated with the coup attempt. My revenge was not to fight. It was to let them lose alone. Sometimes the best answer is written in a notary's office. Fooling a businessman is easy. It is difficult to beat an entrepreneur who wakes up. She thought I hadn't seen the messages. I believed I was too busy. She tried to bring down my castle with a scream, but the castle was built on a legal steel base. I didn't have to win by shouting. I won with the tranquility of someone who is prepared. This story is not about money. It's about respect and the difference between built success and stolen success. She had greed. I had the documents. If it were you, when it came time to sign the contract, would you have read all the clauses or trusted only your appearance?